where to start. There's so many places to take this, by the way. Really, really been looking forward to having a conversation with you today. The first place I would love to take this is, I mean, I know that you've been a prolific researcher in organic growing, organic methods and stuff like that. But the first place I would love to go is what was it that inspired you to sort of research in organic farming and organic sustainable methods? What was it that inspired you to do that?
I think it's a question of age as much as anything else. Unlike yourself, I remember farming in a form that no longer really exists. So it was mostly family farms, mostly mixed farming, and short supply lines, if you like, to the market. So there were marketplaces. And there's a lot of English people go abroad and they love going to French markets or other markets, and they say, oh wow, we wish. Well, in my lifetime that's what we were doing. There's nothing unusual in that. And I think that the way that I was lucky in being brought up in the countryside anyway, I was in a place called Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. It was a small market town. Traditional sort of story is that you could walk around the market square without touching dry land. You go there today and it's really suburbia. It's changed dramatically. So for me, it isn't me that has changed or started to research. It's me thinking, why is everything changing? It's almost the reverse of what you're saying. My first experience of farming, if you like, was when I was, possibly 6, which is what I've just related at the symposium, was looking out of my bedroom window and seeing the garden filled with packets that had been placed on sticks where my mother had planted and my grandmother had planted some annuals. When I asked what had happened, I was told it's the fairies. And I think there was a lot of truth in that, because when you start thinking outside the box, which most science sits in, if you, I'm sure, been to university, you know that the whole object of university is the opposite of the name.
Yeah.
You're going to study, you're going to go in that box, and if you dare write a thesis or paper that does not have a lot of references after it, then it's not going to be accepted, which means that you cannot think freely, because there is no evidence or proof that what you say is of any relevance or interest whatsoever.
True.
So starting from there, I suppose what happened, because I was working in a science-based industry in everyday life, then gardening was my recreation. And of course, when you start gardening, as most of us do as amateurs, you don't know what to do, you read the book. Well, of course, think about it. I was reading books that were written in the 1930s. So the books in 1930 were emphasizing manures and so on. It was not until the 50s, 60s that we started to get NPK, or scientific, if you like, gardening, or techno-gardening, and herbicides and pesticides. And suddenly, for example, there were products that you could buy that would kill worms. Well, that to me was a bit, well, hang on. My science training tells me that really things are pretty harmonious in the world of physics. That's what it is. We have lots of laws. So I don't think it's a very good idea to go interfering with them. In other words, why kill worms? They must be there for a purpose. Mm-hmm. That's what started me off. Simple as that.
Well, that is really fascinating, how that symbiotic relationship with nature actually cultivated you to understand that, like, let's start working with it instead of against it.
Well, it really is obvious for most people. Let me give you a point where I said the 1930s. If you go back to Victorian period, on a bowling green or a lawn of a lordship or ladyship, the undergardeners would be sent out to brush up all the worm casts, those little pyramids of poo that are left by worms in the grass. And that would be taken back to the potting shed. Oh, well, that was just things that Victorians did because it was fine soil. But today, we have discovered that worm casts are almost magical fertilizer in themselves. They're used by a lot of professional flower growers because for some reason, the colour of the flower is more intense. Now, what I would say to you is, well, hang on, colour is only vibration. So physics talking here. So if one flower colour is more intense, then the intensity means that I am receiving more vibration or wavelength than from something else, because the flower itself is only a reflector. Or is it a reflector? Or is it now giving off an intensity, which we might call vitality? Now at that point, of course, you move away from what most people would call hard science and start freaking out because, well, you're talking about elan vital, the idea of an implied spirituality in this, that and the other. Well, okay, that would be Richard Dawkins talking because he's a materialistic scientist. But there is, if you look in science itself, we know that below matter there is energy. So it's at that stage that I fall out with the materialistic scientist, because we have more energy than we do have matter, and so on and so forth. So I'm quite happy to say, in simplistic terms, well, this organic, if you like, plant has more value to it. Mm-hmm. Now at that stage, then you have to start applying modern science in terms of, can you prove that it's more nutritious, or can you prove... because look at the way that Prince Charles has been denigrated by people over the years, because he has had the courage to support organic farming. Now, whether he's bonkers or not, the organic movement has grown as a result of that sort of patronage.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the organic movement in the future continue to keep growing, or do you think that processes of sort of the way the modern day world's moving so quick, do you think that will actually hinder that, or do you see resurgence now of more and more people actually trying to go back to the old ways and wanting more organic produce? Are you seeing that now?
Yeah, I would challenge particularly the use of the word old ways. I would say normal.
Yeah, that's better. I like that.
Normal ways. Yeah. Because there is a difference in our ages, mm-hmm. and what to you is traditional farming is actually high input farming, is technological farming. But let's go back to this global issue of what is implied by what you're saying. Criticism leveled at organic farming would be that it can't sustain the world.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question actually. I want to ask you that.
Now, let's go back to the 1940s, 50s. The health of the nation was very good during the Second World War. That's easily readable.
Yeah, definitely.
The health of the nation before the Second World War was pretty awful, because most people ate chunks of white bread, far too much of it, and too much sweet tea. So the working class were undernourished. Now let's not confuse quantity of food with nourishment. Not the same thing. You can be malnourished and have a lot of food. Get swollen bellies because you have the wrong food. In the 1950s, well, just the end of the 40s, we had change of government to socialism. Socialism, Labour Party, of course, were looking back at the anachronistic landowners of the aristocrats, etc., mm-hmm. many of whom were mostly pro-fascist, by the way. So there was no love lost between them. And the Brave New World of Huxley, part of that Brave New World was agriculture. Well, we nearly starved during the war. So not unnaturally, the government said, what we want is more productivity. Now, the way to get that is with modern farming. Modern farming means technology. It also means fertilizers, etc. Now then you began to see the first grains of what today we call agribusiness and corporate farming. I would go back to your original question about sustainability and challenge you and say, is modern farming sustainable? Answer is clearly not.
No way.
Because you are reading time after time that, the only way forward that we have now is genetically modified materials.
They're talking about even 3D printing food now as well. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. What about the nitrates in the water? What about the fact that we have more and more diseases in plants and we're using more and more chemicals, and we're suddenly finding that because we have to grow pigs and cattle in close communities, they have to have antibiotics. Now we need new antibiotics and so on. So modern day farming is not sustainable in its present form. For those of us who live in an urban society, we are quite unrelated to farming today. So the big issue for me is that the social change is that we have kids at the back end of London, I don't know about Durham, who have never been on a farm and still didn't appreciate where an egg comes from, and when they do, they say, it should be sanitized.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at that, then we're divorced from our natural surroundings. Mm-hmm. If we are then divorced from it, what are we being fed? We're being fed a diet of technology which keeps us occupied, whereas previously we were occupied in growing things and making a technology that supported growing things. Today, if you travel up and down the motorway and look in fields, you'll see black and white cows. You'll see enormous udders, and the whole thing is built for productivity. If you look at beef cattle, you'll often see ground where there are huge French cattle, which have been imported, Charolais, for example. Now, we're so divorced, we don't stop and think, cows walking on land compacts land. Compacts land means that we have to plough differently, or we have to harrow that land, etc. We don't even think of that. Mm-hmm. But when some village somewhere or other, or else when some new housing development suddenly floods, we start screaming blue murder that the government should do something. Mm-hmm. Because the runoff from the compacted soil is a problem, just as it is when they say, it's because we use concrete and it runs over. You've created concrete ground. So there are many, many aspects that say that modern farming is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. Can we feed the planet? Well, let's take a town of 12,000. If you take 12,000 acres, it's generally accepted that should be feed a 12,000 population. 1 acre per person. And that should provide all the vegetables, animal products, etc. that you would need. So that's called a proximity principle. If it was only just down the road, it wouldn't be a problem. That's what it was for me like in the 40s, because the man that delivered the milk came in a cart with a horse and a big aluminium or metal container, and then a little jug which he dripped down, which measured out pints of milk. And that had been in that cow probably 3 or 4 hours before. That was live milk. Now today we have UHT milk, we have pasteurized milk, we have organic pasteurized milk, we have a whole variety of materials which have been denuded of materials which are the micronutrients that keep us healthy. We do know this because you're of a generation where the National Health Service is saying we can't cope. Not just with old people, nobody's suggesting we bump them off. Not yet, anyway. But the point is,
it's not Logan's Run yet, is it?
No, it isn't yet. But we're not far off saying we can't cope. What can't we cope with? Well, it's the modern diseases, and the government tries incredibly hard to say, look, balance carbohydrates with proteins. Please don't feed your children this. Understand that a certain type of drink is actually mainly sugar, that you think is good, and that there are different types of sugar like fructose and so on and so forth. So I think when we're talking about the organic movement, it's not just about buying organic bread in Sainsbury's. It's a much more economic and social aspect that we have to consider.
Complete lifestyle change for everyone.
A lifestyle change, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you? Go on.
Oh no, sorry. I was just going to say, I think a lot of people need to more self-educate as well on the understanding of what's actually being put in the bodies. I mean, they're relying too much on their parents, and their parents are just relying on blind faith from what their parents were told. And so I think somewhere down the line there needs to be some sort of self-education into the process of what's the right nutrients for me, what's the right vitamins for me, where can I really find locally grown source. Some people have never tried a vegetable which is fully grown
and
through love.
And I like that point. And to do that as well, would you like to see, this is a question I had for you in my head as well, but to do that, what Chris has said, the education process, would you like to see this actually implemented in schools where a young child could actually maybe spend a day on the farm or spend a day on an organic farm? Would that be a possibility in your head?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is organic or not, is to get children related to the rural countryside. We can't go back in time, we can only go forward. That's pretty obvious. But we should, you say educate, I would say appreciate. I think it's a question of appreciation for the planet that we live on and the part of the planet that we live on. If you take, we say farming, this is true. Durham, I remember from when I went there last, being in a van looking out the window at night because I couldn't afford to stay anywhere, so kept it in the van.
That's what we did to come here.
And I still like it. When you see you're repeating history. And I could see were flames because, of course, you had all the furnaces and others and mines and things that were going. But outside of that area, I'd come up for the countryside. Now, I would say that the problem is that within Durham itself, we are so sanitized that even if they're taken out, they have to go with the teacher at the back, teacher at the front. They must have their equipment and their safety assessment. And the safety assessment is purely for the protection of the school. Now, that may sound at first sane until you realize that you're actually teaching the dangers of the countryside that exist and not the values of the countryside. It's like going onto a farm. A farm is a dangerous place. Well, excuse me, there's no life without risk. Risk is there. And if you get a kid like me that does the exact opposite of what their parents say, then you cannot blame the parent. You have to blame me, and you cannot blame the school. But of course we would blame the school. Therefore the school is not going to do it quite right, wisely within a world of which everybody sues one another.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's a problem at the minute. Everyone's looking for the blame. Everyone's looking for the point of saying, little Timmy is, even though he's like maybe a troublemaker, he might be a little rebel, but then they could say like, the school's fault. No, it's not. It's the beauty of a child that has to explore the mind, has to explore the earth, has to explore who they are. And too many kids now are bottled up in society and they can't express themselves. And unfortunately, that leads to an expressionless society where everyone has to take opinions from the hierarchy, such as a school. And in that school, then they'll be just creating sheep-like mentality where you just need to follow the rules, just engage in civil action and not explore what it really means to be human on this planet.
Yes, but isn't that the purpose of government? Which is to control. If you have power, then your desire is to always control absolutely. And part of the process is the diet that we have of misinformation. And also the box systems that I referred to earlier, because most of our children are much more subject to streaming or an academic view of life rather than an explorative view of life. So we're not preparing children for not going into an academic world. Mm-hmm. We need more engineers, we need more farmers, but we're not going to get more farmers because the land is controlled by agribusiness and by corporations. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get much more technology of an independent view. You couldn't today have the creators, say, of Austin or Morris or even of hand-built motor cars. You can't start today because the system is stacked against you. So you have to generally come into a corporate view. Yes. And if you're not in a corporate view, you are often sidelined, and sidelined in education. Mm. That's for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, Dan, I was just going to say, you strike me as someone like how you, when you were younger, you wanted to have that. You had that like that risky idea, that like little cheeky chap mentality, and that's what I'm getting from you, by the way, the vibe. And I was just thinking that you've grown up to be a very successful person. And did you use that to be like your creative outlook on life? I mean,
yeah, I think that's the difference between myself and the youth of today. I was told, let's take a subject which is very common right at this moment, is paedophilia. Now, I was told that the world was full of dirty old men. You don't take sweets from strangers. Mm-hmm. So when I was about 7 and I went down with my friends to fields, because we were lucky enough to go into fields, and we saw a tramp lying there exposing himself. We thought that was great fun, ran away, and knew exactly what was going on. So we were educated, if you like. We knew what was there, mm-hmm. and it was reported to our parents, and it was then dealt with. I'm not sure that today the generation is prepared enough even to know what the limitations are, and that there's good and there's bad, or there's morality or not morality. And I accept that the morality is governed by culture, but that's why I think my generation is different. Risk. I've got myself into terrible trouble, I think, by doing things I should not. But it has given me the ability to understand what life is about, and the value of life and the value of things.
That was a very, and that's what we all need to go through. We all need to go through that process of faults in order to pick ourselves up, to see what. I mean, I don't know what you did, but we need to grow through the hard times, and ultimately that would lead you to the person you are today.
Well, yes, absolutely, because it's a question of discipline. I'm told that life was easy for my generation. I had to borrow, when I first got my first mortgage, I had to borrow money from my mother-in-law, who I really didn't like. I had to take out a second sort of insurance to make sure that I paid. And to do that, I had to main job during the day. I had to do early morning office cleaning, and I also had to do bread lorry filling. And I did that for 3 or 4 years. I don't consider that was an easy life. That was blooming hard work. But I was determined to get what I wanted. That was it. It was the determination that I had learned, I suppose, that the value of discipline and the value of discipline on yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And you learned that from an early age as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to jump back to a point I had before about on the organic farming sense of it and sustainability for the planet, do you think as a species we need to actually adopt a new model, and maybe a new model that's actually more in touch with the natural balance
if you
on
look
nature?
at the United Nations, a much maligned society, the food and agricultural side of it, they have put forward nutrition. They have tried to have education on soil. They are trying to not encourage GM material. They're trying to encourage farmers to use traditional methods and maintain the social structures. Few people realize, for example, that when they buy free trade products, that sometimes too can also cut across cultures, because at the end of the day, many of the middlemen, because free trade, the organization itself, becomes a middleman in effect. Yes, it raises the standard of some people, but by the same token, the trade routes and the nasty middlemen, as they're often described, of course, then lose out. And that's when you begin to change the structure of society. The United Nations realizes that the social changes that have come about within the 20th century have not been to the benefit of mankind, and certainly not to the benefit of the environment. Even at your ages, you will have seen that there are less butterflies and less birds. It's not easy. It's not, yeah, and yet when Carson wrote Silent Spring, the place was full of them.
Yeah.
And she noticed a downturn. Now what do we do? Well, we'll put it out to another university, which the RSP will probably fund, to do a study. And when we've done that study, we come to which every academic knows, that wonderful phrase, which is we need more research, which actually boils down to the fact we need more money.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what it means. And nothing's being done. I think the West in particular is appalling at doing things. It's very good at telling us what the problem is, but because agribusiness has us by the throat, we can't actually go backwards in your term, and we can't go forward in my way, because what are we going to do? Are we going to follow the Corbyn principle of nationalised land? I don't think so. That's just not going to happen, even though it might be a good thing to start subsidising smaller farmers. Common agricultural policy, absolute disaster for small and family farms. Wonderful if you have acreage, because really you're just creaming it in. But you are also then changing the social structure, which is exactly what the Common Agricultural Policy was designed to do. Supposedly to upgrade the farmer, the working farmer, the family farmer, from a poor social position, otherwise called a peasant, into being a wonderful cleaner or hop picker or a restaurant waiter. That's the way it's gone. So it might sound harsh, it might sound sarcastic, but look at the facts. What's happened in a country like Romania or Poland? Mass emigration. Not only of their doctors and nurses needing for our hospital, well, excuse me, which peasants paid for their doctors? So why are they over here? It was the peasant taxes that paid for them, they're here. We're changing the social structure and fabric of society.
When you were saying before about, you made the point about how you said at one point in time you would look around, there'd be loads of insects and said all the butterflies and stuff. Is that a big concern for you at the moment? Because it's a big concern for me, and I know it's been raised on many different people. I think it was David Attenborough who said that about the bee situation, about if bees go in the next 5 years we'll be dead. Do you see a solution for that, and do you think that's a big problem that we face?
Do you mean the bees particularly?
All insects in general, really, because I think that every insect's important.
Because for a fact, our relationship with nature is no different than it is to green men from Mars. If it moves and buzzes or stings us, we kill it. That's what we do as a race. We don't really understand it. I think that as a gardener, I hate cabbage white butterflies because they strip my cabbages. I think we don't ask why or how, and what can I do about it? A little bit of netting over my cabbages stops that, for example. But the majority of us will reach for our spray can and kill them. That's a problem that we see with all insects. Insects, this is what I was saying about young people. It's ridiculous that young people don't see beetles walking around their life. They don't see flies running around their life. Now, if we see a fly, we have to kill it because it carries germs. Well, fine, okay. It's carried germs for the last millennia,
Exactly.
and we're still here. I'm sorry, we're still here.
Exactly.
And my immune system is crushed by sanitation. Well, our immune systems are. I accept perfectly well that in the 20th century, last part of the 19th century, there are better understanding of the disposal of our own detritus has actually improved our health, far more than medicine, actually. And that we're cleaner, we understand things better. But now we're actually reversing it, because we now understand there are more bacteria cells in our bacteria in our body than there are cells in our body.
That's really interesting.
So now we stand and say, hey, what's all this bacteria about? Well, that's what we need to start cultivating. We need to look back at the fungi. We need to start look at how we can feed the world. Maybe, I don't know, there's a magic mushroom that actually does the job of nutrition rather than making us feel so happy.
I like that. I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say there again? What was I going to say? I had an interesting point I want to ask you. Oh, yeah. When you were talking about how certain people don't even see this world around us, like insects and beetles, like you said, and stuff like that. And like you said about how people, you were clever enough to just think of a quick solution. Instead of killing the insect, you thought, here's a different viable way around it that still helps me, but it also still is in balance with nature as well. Like, you just put a net over, that's all you did. Why do you think that we are, because I've tried to question this, I don't know what it is. Why are we, as a race, why are we so susceptible to just do things that, like, carelessness, like not really thinking, not really just
not looking at the long term.
Yeah, looking at the long term picture of the planet. We just instantaneously just want to just we don't see. We have like tunnel vision in everything we do.
The question I'd ask you is, and I'll come back to it, so I don't want it answered, is who's the we, first of all. But I would like to pick up on a point you're making indirectly there about plastics. Plastics are not a problem. Now, that's a commercial, controversial statement, isn't it? Plastics are not a problem. They're not a problem. The bottle did not walk into the ocean. The bottle did not walk onto the beach. We have to understand that the pollution that we have is mostly man-made. Now, the solution, it can also be possible. Microplastics, etc., all these sorts of things, people are just beginning to realize, I think, how useful plastics are. Okay, let's go ahead and ban plastics. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't have the same shoes on we'd probably got, and our watches wouldn't be the same, and the underwear of most women would certainly not be the same. So when we start thinking about what plastics are, we realize that it's something that we have to learn to dispose of properly. That's the problem. We haven't learned to dispose of them. So it's no good encouraging children, as I saw on the TV. This is partly your point of saying, plastics are bad, I've collected them, we need to get rid of plastics. That is not the point. The point is, how do we dispose of the plastics? And young person, will you please start thinking in terms of technology or in chemistry or biology or whatever turns you on to live with plastics and clean the plastics that we currently have. And by the way, there's a lot of plastic in makeup, so I blame women for not just microbeads, but cleaning themselves
for the planet.
with these little pad things which are generally not cotton, then disposing of them badly. We come back to the problem of pollution is disposing by human beings. We're awfully dirty and grubby. We chuck bicycles in rivers, think nothing of it, do we?
Yeah, no.
Now you tell me why we do that, because you use the word we.
I mean myself as well. When I say we, I don't just mean in general. I mean, I'm understand of my own contradictions in my life. I mean, I've tried and zoom out in as much as I can and things that I do. I mean, even the clothes I wear now, everything really around us have contradictions to my being. So I'm trying. I mean, when I say we, I mean myself as well.
So we do try. But I've driven along, and as I'm sure many people have done, my pack of sandwiches on my... So I've eaten them going along. What do I do with the pack?
Yeah.
Wind the window down, look in the mirror, and chuck it out. I've done that. Why? And I've said to myself afterwards, because you're a lazy bugger. That's number one. Number two, you did that deliberately because you looked in your mirror to make sure that nobody was going to say that you're a bad boy.
Yeah.
I didn't want to feel bad doing it, but I still did it. And that is a fault with us as human beings. And then we have to stop it. That's why we come back to the social structure. When I was a kid, if I did that, what would happen? My mother would make me pick it up. There's nobody to make me pick it up.
It's interesting to know how that. I love that point, by the way. I was trying to analyse something in my head because you said it's a societal structure. I think is that the word you use? Societal structure. Yeah. It's interesting because if you're in a city, I think that's more likely going to happen. But what I've noticed, if I go to the Lake District or something like that, somebody is willing to pick that up straight away. Or if I see litter, I'm willing to pick that litter up.
Yes.
Like it's weird how that's different environments or different whatever it is. It's just have you ever analysed that?
You become more respectful of something.
Yeah.
But you can't always put your finger on why you become more respectful. But what it does say then, following your reasoning, if what you were saying is right, then we are not respectful of an urban built-up society.
So then does that say...
Because we're not designed to be in it, are we?
That's what I was just about to say to you. Is that could be the reason why maybe we detach from it because it's not really who we are?
No. And it's still why majority of people try to have at the back of their mind some utopian view that there is a country cottage somewhere or other that they can eventually retire to. But we have to make the cities that we live in.
More, yeah.
Yeah. So how are we going to do that without social revolution at this moment?
I mean,
We can't. I don't think we can.
No, I mean, I stood on the platform today and I made myself laugh because having got to the sort of conversation we're talking about, I thought to myself, God, I sound just like Lenin and Trotsky. Because that's what you're asking for, in effect, is some form of social revolution.
Yeah.
And are we going to get it? We see the move of the right in Europe, part of nationalism, and that's understandable when smaller people or smaller countries cannot determine their own future. So
It is becoming like nationalism itself is, but it's even becoming a rise in Germany, one of the most agricultural set countries in the world at the moment. Like financially, they are top dogs really in the European market, and they're even looking at nationalism. Could it just be media frenzy as well? Could that play a huge part in it?
well, media is responsible for the misinformation, generally speaking. Yes, of course. Have we learned to live with it? Have we learned to watch the BBC and immediately switch to Russia Today, and then say, okay, what do I believe? Whom do I believe? Until we do that, we become victims of the media. We've only got ourselves to blame. I learned that when I lived in Ireland because, of course, the Troubles were on in the north, and I was living in the south, so I used to look at RTE, the Irish broadcasters, and watch BBC, and I got two different stories. So as I had two different stories, that was the first time I realised that, hang on, my mind is being bent. I'm not being caught like that again. So I look at in the news world, I look at a wide spectrum of media about important issues, not about the dog down the road, but when it comes to Syria and places like that, I like to get a broad spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. What's your views on global warming? What do you think about that?
What do I think of global warming? Well, it's interesting that you use the term global warming. I'm not sure I agree about global warming. I do agree about climate change.
Right. Could you just expand on that?
I would like to change that. I mean, the evidence is out in many ways. Obviously, some things are going wrong. That's very, very clear to anybody. Whether it's warming or not, I mean, we're looking at the degrees, and 1 degree or 2 degrees will do this, will do that. I think if you look at nature itself, even in a drought situation, and dryness. Nature has a habit of looking after itself and adapting. That's the whole principal point of I know it's not the main thought of life of Darwinism and the origin of species, etc., but nevertheless, adaptation is there. And adaptation can be very quick. So I would wait to see. Again, I find as I get older, I'm getting very skeptical. I was listening, when I was in San Francisco, I was listening to, can't remember his name, one of the Kennedys anyway, that's very big into the global warming.
Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, global warming. And I noticed that it was heavily biased to the democratic view.
I was going to say that, that's what I've realised as well.
So I thought, well, what you say is true, but please don't tell me that
that's the only root
a
cause.
polar bear is going to drown, because they're very good swimmers, and they know where the Canadian mainland is. So let's see how many polar bears there are in Canada before I start getting too excited about it. Now that sounds to many people very caustic and very challenging, but I'm sorry, that's what we should be doing, is trying to stop being manipulated with sound bites and try to understand what's going on and then try to contribute something.
Do you think as well with global warming, because I mean, it's not it is sort of linked, but it's not directly linked, but I've read a few books on a guy called Ronald Carlson, he's called, who did like a lot of research on glacier displacement and stuff like that. And I know Graham Hancock, he talks about how indigenous cultures in the past, they understood that on a cosmic level, like there is cycles that we don't understand that are going on all the time. Could you think that could be one of the reasons as well that plays into
absolutely. There are massive cycles. If you take James Lovelock's the Gaia hypothesis in its roundness, and look at what he said about Daisy World. He said that Daisy World will continue to exist, but it will get rid of us, basically. That's the point. And there seems to be some logic to that conclusion, because we are the people that are causing the imbalance one way or another.
Maybe just to sort of bring this podcast to an end, if you could maybe sort of give sort of three things to people now that they can try and implement straight away in their life to try and live a more sustainable life, or maybe 3 things that you've implemented in your life that's been a huge thing. Could you really give three things?
I mean, unbelievably for me, I bought a hybrid car. That's a big deal for me, because I couldn't get my Land Rover style that I wanted, so I downsized. Some people may not call it, but I did. I downsized, and I'm very happy. And I get in that car, and I travel, and I think I have done 66. Next time I'm going to do 78. My highest is 99.9, and I'm desperate to get 100. So it's actually something small like that is made in a very small way, and it has improved my bank balance immensely. Wow. It really has. So that's one small thing. The other thing is that I do in my garden, smallish garden, it's in the countryside, but it's modern development, so it's not huge. But I do not use garden chemicals. I use only organic materials, mostly seaweeds, humic products, rather than trying to use straight fertilizers and chemical fertilizers. That's a small thing. The other thing I try to do is in everyday life is to influence the influencers. I'm lucky because I meet a lot of people. For example, in one brand I particularly work with, I'm trying to get them to have a corporate strategy and say, yes, it's wonderful to see this new plastic flooring that you put in, and you forgot to look at low level energy lighting. Let's have a corporate strategy. That can be done in the home exactly the same way. It can be done in the school, and school children in particular should, I think, in their teenage years be concentrating heavily upon thinking of ways of change, of improvement, of change. I love the idea of picking up plastic bottles and getting involved, but that's the media pushing us into one thing. We really need to have some sort of revolutionary thinking, some better appreciation of one another's talents and abilities, and cultivate those. Some may call that elitism. Wow, that's a nasty thing to do. Unfortunately, there are some people that are much more clever than me, and I try my level best to support them and not criticize them or drag them backwards into the past, but rather into the future.
Oh wow, what a lovely place to
What a place to finish. Wow.